We aren't driving 2 hours for a stupid hobby, Chloe. Grow up. Those were the last words my mother said before slamming the door on the biggest night of my life. I cried, staring at their empty chairs. But 3 weeks later, they were forced to watch me on national television, exposing a secret that would tear our family apart. I was born into a family that measured love in tax brackets and framed diplomas. In our house in the affluent suburbs of Connecticut, you were only as valuable as the prestige you brought to the family name. My father, Richard, was a senior wealth manager at a massive firm. He spoke in dividends, ROI, and risk assessments. My mother, Brenda, was a terrifyingly perfectly coiffed socialite whose primary occupation was orchestrating the neighborhood's perception of our family. And then there was my older brother, Tristan. Tristan was the golden child. By the time he was 24, he had a law degree from Georgetown, a fiancé who looked like a Ralph Lauren model, and a corner office waiting for him in Manhattan. When Tristan passed the bar exam, my parents rented out the entire dining room of the country club. My mother hired a string quartet. My father bought him a vintage Rolex. I remember sitting at the edge of that party, clutching a cheap glass of sparkling cider, realizing with absolute clarity that I would never, ever earn that kind of celebration. Because I didn't care about law, or finance, or climbing the corporate ladder. I cared about the truth, and I cared about telling stories. I was an independent investigative documentary filmmaker. To my parents, this was a grotesque failure of parenting on their part. Whenever my mother's friends asked what I was up to, she would offer a tight, embarrassed smile and say, "Chloe is finding herself. She's doing some freelance video editing while she looks for a real job in PR." I wasn't looking for a job in PR. I was spending my days in my cramped, windowless studio apartment in New Haven, living off ramen and cold brew, pouring thousands of hours into a documentary I called The Gray Water. It started as a small project about the dying local fish populations in the Quinnipiac River, but as I dug deeper, it spiraled into a massive, terrifying conspiracy. I had spent 2 years tracking illegal chemical dumping by a conglomerate called Vanguard Synthetics. I had interviewed sick factory workers in secret, dug through decades of buried public records, and even hidden in the bed of a pickup truck in the freezing rain to catch footage of Vanguard's trucks illegally discharging toxic waste into the municipal reservoir in the dead of night. It was dangerous, exhausting, and completely consuming. It was also the best work I had ever done. When I finally finished the film, I submitted it to the East Coast Independent Storytellers Festival. It wasn't the Oscars, but in the indie journalism world, it was highly respected. The judges were made up of veteran journalists and seasoned filmmakers. Out of 4,000 submissions, The Gray Water was nominated for Best Investigative Feature. I was ecstatic. I remember getting the email at 2 a.m., screaming into my pillow and crying tears of pure, exhausted relief. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had proven my worth. I wasn't just a disappointment. I was a journalist. I was nominated for an award. I foolishly thought my parents would finally see me. Sunday night family dinners were a mandatory affair at my parents' sprawling colonial home. I showed up that week with a knot of anxiety and hope twisting in my stomach. I waited until we were eating dessert, a perfectly plated lemon tart my mother had ordered from a boutique bakery, to break the news. "I have some news," I said, my voice trembling slightly. I pulled the printed invitation from my purse and placed it on the mahogany table. My documentary. It was selected. "I've been nominated for the top award at the East Coast Storytellers Festival." Silence fell over the table. Tristan paused, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth. My father picked up the invitation, squinting at it as if it were written in a foreign language. "An award?" my father asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. "For that little river project you've been wasting your savings on?" "It's an investigative feature, Dad," I corrected, feeling my chest tighten. "It's a really big deal. The ceremony is next Saturday in Boston. I have 2 VIP guest tickets. I'd really love it if you and Mom came." My mother sighed, the kind of heavy, long-suffering sigh she usually reserved for when the dry cleaner ruined a silk blouse. "Boston? Chloe, that's a 2-hour drive. On a Saturday night." "I know, but it's important to me," I pleaded, looking desperately between the two of them. "I've worked on this for 2 years. This could be my big break." Tristan let out a soft, patronizing chuckle. "Chloe, come on. It's an indie film fest. What do you win? A plastic trophy and a $50 gift card to a vegan bakery? Dad has his quarterly review dinner that night. You can't expect them to cancel that for a hobby. It's not a hobby, I snapped, my voice rising. It's my career. I exposed a major corporation. People are getting sick. This actually matters. My father dropped the invitation back onto the table, shaking his head. Watch your tone, young lady. Your brother is right. We have obligations. Real obligations. Not to mention, this whole crusade against corporations is deeply embarrassing. You're trying to ruin a legitimate business because of a few dead fish. It's naive. Dad, they are dumping carcinogens into the drinking water. Enough! My mother interrupted sharply. She looked at me with cold, hard eyes. We are not driving 2 hours for a stupid hobby, Chloe. We are not sitting in some dingy theater to watch you play pretend journalist. When you get a real job with a 401k, we will celebrate. Until then, grow up and stop expecting us to drop our lives for your little projects. I sat there, the air knocked out of my lungs. I looked at the invitation sitting next to my father's half-empty wine glass. The dismissal was so complete, so brutal, that I didn't even have the energy to cry. Fine, I whispered. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked out the front door. I didn't look back. The day of the ceremony was a miserable, pouring Saturday. The sky was the color of bruised iron, and the rain slashed against the windshield of my beat-up Honda Civic as I made the lonely drive up to Boston. I had bought a dress from a thrift store, a sleek, midnight blue gown that I had painstakingly tailored myself to fit perfectly. I spent an hour doing my hair and makeup, trying to convince the girl in the mirror that she belonged in a room full of brilliant creators. But as I pulled up to the historic Orpheum Theater, the pit in my stomach was overwhelmingly heavy. The lobby was buzzing with energy. People were holding champagne flutes, laughing, exchanging business cards, and posing in front of the Step and Repeat banner. I saw directors I recognized from Vice and HBO mingling near the bar. It was everything I had ever dreamed of, but I felt entirely like a ghost. I walked to my assigned table near the front of the stage. Table 12. There were 6 seats. 3 were occupied by my small crew, my cinematographer, Leo, and my sound mixer, Sarah. The other 3 seats were mine, and the 2 I had reserved for my parents. I sat down, staring at the 2 empty chairs next to me. The crisp white place cards mocked me. Guest of Chloe Evans. Guest of Chloe Evans. They didn't show? Leo asked gently, placing a hand on my shoulder. I shook my head, swallowing the hard lump in my throat. No, they had a dinner. Sarah gave me a look of deep sympathy and poured me a glass of wine. Screw them, Chloe. You earned this. We are so proud of you. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. As the lights dimmed and the ceremony began, my heart pounded. I tried to focus on the host, a well-known radio journalist, but my eyes kept drifting to those empty chairs. My father was probably smoking a cigar right now, laughing with his golf buddies about his son, the lawyer. My mother was probably bragging about Tristan's upcoming wedding. I was completely invisible to them. The night wore on. Finally, they reached the final award of the evening, Best Investigative Feature. This year's nominees tackled some of the most dangerous, complex issues in our modern world, the presenter announced, opening the gold envelope. But one film stood out for its sheer bravery, its meticulous research, and its unflinching look at corporate greed. The award goes to a torturous pause. Chloe Evans for The Grey Water. The room erupted in applause. Leo and Sarah screamed, jumping out of their seats and pulling me into a massive hug. I was in shock. My legs felt like jelly as I stood up and made my way to the stage. The spotlight blinded me. I accepted the heavy glass trophy, my hands shaking so badly I thought I might drop it. I looked out into the crowd. I saw hundreds of people smiling at me, clapping for me, and in the second row, I saw those 2 empty chairs. I stepped up to the microphone. Thank you, I choked out, fighting back tears. I spent 2 years in the dark trying to bring this story to the light. I was told countless times that this was a waste of time, that this was a stupid hobby. I paused, my voice steadying, growing colder and more resolute. But the truth is never a hobby. Vanguard Synthetics has poisoned the water of thousands of families, and tonight, people are finally listening. This is just the beginning. I walked off the stage to a standing ovation. As I returned to my table, clutching the cold glass of the trophy, I realized something fundamental had shifted inside me. I didn't care about my parents' approval anymore. I didn't need it. I had my own voice. After the ceremony, the theater transitioned into a networking gala. I was standing near the back, catching my breath, when a tall, gray-haired man in a sharp, expensive suit approached me. He didn't look like an indie filmmaker. He looked like a shark. "Chloe Evans," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Jonathan Croft." I froze. Everyone in journalism knew that name. Jonathan Croft was the executive producer of The National Hour, the most watched investigative news program on primetime television. "Mr. Croft," I said, shaking his hand, trying to hide my shock. "It's an honor. What are you doing at an indie festival?" "Scouting," he said plainly, taking a sip of his scotch. "And I'm glad I did. I watched your screener for The Grey Water yesterday after the festival jury flagged it. It's brilliant work. Raw, a little unpolished, but the investigative rigor is bulletproof." "Thank you," I breathed. He leaned in slightly, his eyes narrowing. "You have the Vanguard synthetics dumping on tape. You have the internal memos." "I do. Boxfuls of them." "Good," Croft said. He pulled a heavy, embossed business card from his pocket and handed it to me. "I want to acquire the broadcast rights to your footage, but more than that, I want you. The National Hour is doing a massive, two-part special on corporate environmental negligence. We want Vanguard to be the centerpiece. I want to put you on camera, in front of 12 million viewers, to break this story." My jaw almost hit the floor. 12 million viewers, national television, prime time. "There's just one thing I need to know," Croft continued, his gaze piercing right through me. "Vanguard Synthetics is heavily backed by a private equity group. They have deep pockets, and they destroy the lives of people who cross them. If we put you on TV and you name names, they will come after you. They will come after your family." He paused. "Are you prepared for the fallout?" I thought about my parents. I thought about the smirks, the dismissals, the years of being treated like a delusional child. I thought about the two empty chairs at my table. "Mr. Croft," I said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. "You have no idea." The following 3 weeks were a dizzying blur of non-stop flights, endless legal meetings, and the harsh fluorescent lights of the broadcast center in Manhattan. Jonathan Croft was a man of his word. He brought me into the inner sanctum of the National Hour, treating me not as a novice indie filmmaker, but as a peer. I was given an office, a small army of seasoned researchers, and a direct line to his lead forensic accountant, a brilliant, no-nonsense woman named Rebecca Harding. Our goal was simple but monumental: trace the money. We knew Vanguard Synthetics was dumping toxic chemicals, benzene, trichloroethylene, and heavy metals into the municipal water supply to save tens of millions in proper disposal fees. My footage proved the act. But Jonathan wanted the architects. He wanted to know who was greenlighting the illegal budget cuts from the top down. We spent hours in a windowless conference room plastered with whiteboards, connecting subsidiaries, offshore accounts, and corporate boards. It was exhausting, tedious work. On a rainy Tuesday evening, just 5 days before the broadcast was scheduled to air, the walls of my entire reality completely collapsed. I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by printed bank ledgers that Vanguard had been forced to turn over during a previous sealed civil suit. Rebecca was projecting a sprawling corporate flowchart onto the wall. "Vanguard is a shield," Rebecca explained, tapping her pen against the whiteboard. "They absorb the operational risk. But the actual entity profiting from the disposal budgets is their parent private equity firm, a shell corporation registered in Delaware called Oakmont Holdings." "Oakmont," I repeated, rubbing my tired eyes. "So we go after Oakmont." "Yes, but Oakmont isn't just a faceless fund," Jonathan interjected, walking into the room with a stack of SEC filings. "Oakmont is actively managed by a third-party wealth management firm. They handle the dividends, they structure the payouts, and they deliberately miscategorize the toxic disposal fines as infrastructure depreciation to hide the paper trail from federal regulators. This management firm is complicit. They built the financial labyrinth." He tossed the thick manila folder onto the conference table. "The firm is Prescott and Hayes," Jonathan said. My breath caught in my throat. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. "Prescott and Hayes." "Chloe?" Rebecca asked, noticing the sudden, drained color of my face. "Are you all right?" I couldn't speak. I reached for the folder, my hands trembling violently. I flipped open the cover and stared at the SEC disclosure forms. There, on page 4, listed as the senior portfolio director and primary signatory for Oakmont Holdings, was a name I had known my entire life: Richard Evans. My father. A cold, sickening wave of nausea washed over me. I dropped the papers as if they were physically burning my skin. It wasn't just a coincidence. My father wasn't just an employee at a massive firm. He was the architect of the cover-up. He was the one moving the blood money. Suddenly, every interaction we'd had over the last 2 years flashed through my mind in a horrifying new context. His absolute disdain for my documentary, his insistence that I drop my crusade, calling my investigation a stupid hobby. It wasn't just standard parental disappointment, it was calculated panic. He knew exactly what I was investigating, because he was the one funding the destruction. He was terrified I would connect the dots. "Chloe, what is it?" Jonathan asked, his voice losing its usual sharp edge, replaced by genuine concern. "Richard Evans," I whispered, pointing a shaking finger at the document. "That's my father." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the conference room. Rebecca slowly lowered her pen. Jonathan stared at me, his jaw tightening as the magnitude of the revelation settled in. But the nightmare wasn't over. My mind started racing, piecing together the rest of the puzzle. If my father was managing the money, who was managing the legal liabilities? "Rebecca," I said, my voice suddenly sharp and frantic, "pull up the non-disclosure agreements. The ones Vanguard forced the sick factory workers to sign when they paid for their medical bills out of court. Who drafted them?" Rebecca furiously typed on her laptop, pulling up the digital archives of the NDA contracts I had sourced months ago. She zoomed in on the bottom of the last page, looking for the representing legal counsel. "It's a Manhattan firm," Rebecca said, her eyes scanning the screen. "Caldwell and Reed." I let out a harsh, broken laugh. Tears stung the corners of my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, blinding rage. Caldwell and Reed, Tristan's firm. Tristan was a junior partner specializing in corporate defense. They were all in on it. My perfect, wealthy, pristine family. My father hid the money, and my brother silenced the victims. And my mother? She baked lemon tarts and hosted country club dinners, playing the ignorant, perfect matriarch, while her husband and son profited off poisoned water and dying children. Jonathan sat down in the chair across from me. He folded his hands, looking at me with intense gravity. "Chloe," Jonathan said quietly, "if we go to air with this, we don't hold back. We name Vanguard, we name Oakmont, and we name Prescott and Hayes. We will show Richard Evans's signature on national television. The Department of Justice will subpoena him by Monday morning. Your father will face federal indictment. Your brother could be disbarred." He leaned forward. "This is your family. I need to know, right now, if you want me to pull the segment. I will respect your decision." I closed my eyes. I pictured the empty chairs at my award ceremony. I heard my mother's voice telling me to grow up. But more than that, I saw the faces of the families living along the Quinnipiac River. I saw the children with asthma inhalers, the factory workers with failing livers. I saw the truth. I opened my eyes and looked directly into Jonathan's face. "Print it all," I said, my voice cold and steady as steel. "Burn it down. Sunday night, 8 p.m. EST. I sat in the plush leather chair of the CBS broadcast studio, the glaring studio lights baking my skin. The makeup artist had just powdered my forehead for the final time. Across from me sat Jonathan Croft, shuffling his blue index cards, looking every bit the legendary anchor he was. 30 seconds to air, the stage manager announced through the booming studio speakers. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My phone, sitting on the small coffee table next to me, was completely silent. I hadn't spoken to my parents or Tristan since the night I walked out of their dining room over a month ago. I knew exactly where they were right now. Sunday night at 8 p.m., they were sitting in their custom-upholstered living room, drinking expensive wine, likely watching the national hour. It was my father's favorite show. 10 seconds, the stage manager called out. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I squared my shoulders. I was no longer the disappointment. I was the reckoning. In 3, 2, 1. The red light on the center camera blinked on. "Good evening, I'm Jonathan Croft," he began, his authoritative voice commanding the room. "Tonight, a special investigation. For decades, Vanguard Synthetics has been a cornerstone of American manufacturing. But behind their locked gates and scrubbed public relations campaigns lies a terrifying secret. A secret that has poisoned the drinking water of thousands." He turned slightly toward me. "And the person who uncovered this corporate atrocity wasn't a federal regulator. It was an independent investigative filmmaker named Chloe Evans. Chloe, thank you for being here." "Thank you for having me, Jonathan," I said, my voice surprisingly clear and unwavering. For the next 40 minutes, we laid out the entire conspiracy. They played my footage. The nation watched as Vanguard trucks illegally dumped black, sludgy chemicals into the reservoir under the cover of darkness. They heard the tearful testimonies of the sick workers. And then, the final segment began. "The question, Chloe, is how a corporation affords to hide something of this magnitude," Jonathan prompted, right on cue. "They don't do it alone," I answered, looking directly into the camera lens. "Vanguard's parent company, Oakmont Holdings, utilized a prestigious wealth management firm to deliberately launder the penalty funds. They categorized environmental destruction as standard depreciation." A graphic appeared on the screen beside me, showing the corporate hierarchy. "And who orchestrated this financial cover-up?" Jonathan asked. "The senior portfolio director at Prescott and Hayes," I stated clearly. The graphic zoomed in, displaying the signed SEC document in bright, high-definition resolution. "Richard Evans." "Your father," Jonathan clarified for the millions watching at home. "Yes," I said, not blinking. "My father." Furthermore, the legal intimidation used to silence the victims was drafted by the corporate defense firm Caldwell and Reed, specifically by a junior partner named Tristan Evans, my brother. The studio was dead silent, except for the low hum of the cameras. "You are implicating your own family in federal crimes," Jonathan said softly. "Why?" "Because the truth doesn't care about my last name," I said. "And the people of this community deserve justice more than my family deserves their country club memberships." The broadcast ended. The red light blinked off. Almost instantly, my phone, which had been silent for weeks, began to vibrate. It buzzed once, then twice, then continuously, violently vibrating off the wood of the coffee table. I picked it up. 14 missed calls, Dad. 8 missed calls, Tristan. 22 text messages from Mom. The messages ranged from frantic confusion to outright, explosive rage. "What have you done? Call me right now. You are ruining our lives. You ungrateful, lying bitch." I didn't answer a single one. I powered the phone off, dropped it into my purse, and walked out of the studio. The fallout was swifter and more devastating than anyone could have predicted. By Tuesday morning, the Department of Justice announced a formal, sweeping investigation into Vanguard Synthetics, Oakmont Holdings, and Prescott and Hayes. When federal agents raided the offices of Prescott and Hayes, the footage was broadcast on every major news network. I watched from my hotel room as my father, looking suddenly old and frail, was escorted out of his glass-walled building in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled, a jacket thrown over his hands to hide the steel. Tristan's firm immediately placed him on indefinite, unpaid administrative leave, pending a massive internal ethics review. His fiancée, terrified of the impending legal scandal and the freezing of his assets, quietly broke off the engagement and moved back to her parents' estate in the Hamptons. 2 months later, they finally cornered me. I had moved into a beautiful, sunlit apartment in Brooklyn, funded by a lucrative multi-year investigative contract I had signed with CBS. I was packing my gear for a new assignment when the lobby buzzer rang. Against my better judgment, I let them up. My parents stood in the doorway of my apartment. They looked utterly shattered. My mother's hair was unstyled, her designer clothes looking loose and tired. My father looked haggard, his eyes bloodshot, wearing an ankle monitor tightly strapped beneath his slacks as he awaited federal trial. "Chloe," my mother choked out, bursting into loud, ugly tears the moment I opened the door. "How could you? How could you do this to your own blood? Your father is facing prison. Tristan is ruined. We are a laughingstock." "You destroyed this family," my father hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. "Over a stupid film." I gave you everything. I put a roof over your head. I paid for your life. And you stabbed me in the back for 15 minutes of fame. I leaned against the doorframe, looking at the two people who had raised me. I felt no guilt. I felt no sorrow. I just felt profoundly tired of their illusions. You didn't give me everything, Dad, I said quietly. You gave me money. That's all you had to offer. You destroyed this family the moment you decided that poisoning thousands of people was an acceptable way to pay for your luxury cars. I didn't write your signature on those documents. You did. I just turned on the lights. We are your family, my mother screamed, clutching her purse to her chest. No, I replied, my voice perfectly calm. You were my biology. I'm choosing my own family now. Please leave. And do not ever contact me again. I shut the door softly in their faces. I locked the deadbolt. For a moment, I stood in the hallway, listening to my mother sobbing on the other side of the heavy wood, my father's angry footsteps retreating down the hall. Then, I turned around, walked into my bright, sunlit office, and got back to work. If Chloe's journey from a dismissed daughter to a fearless, truth-telling journalist inspired you, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs a reminder to never give up on their passion. Don't let anyone call your dreams a stupid hobby. Subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life stories of justice, family betrayal, and ultimate triumph. Drop a comment down below. Would you have exposed your own family's secrets? Let's talk about it right now.